Now, I think at this point now the key question is, how does this all end? So what's the end game? What happens? Now, I think in my book I speak of 3 stages of this end game. One is what I call the nationalization of money and credit. What's very clear is that the state and the central bank, which is the state, cannot allow the market to work, because the market would liquidate. But that cannot allow it to happen. So what we see is quantitative easing. We will see other measures. I think part of this is already happening. I think more of this will most likely happen, which is that the state will force or via regulation encourage certain entities to buy these and hold on to these assets and not sell them. And it's very interesting that obviously all these governments have now accumulated so much debt that I think in many cases these governments will never repay the debt they have accumulated. But at the same time, the state regulates the banks and tells the banks that government bonds are the safest asset. So in terms of supervision and capital allocation, risk allocation, if a bank buys more government bonds, it is not a hit to its capital ratios. So banks have an incentive to buy more government bonds. It's very interesting. A year ago, Spanish banks were obviously in trouble because they participated in the Spanish real estate bull market that popped in 2007. So Spanish banks have their trouble. But a year ago, Spanish banks had about 13% of their balance sheet in government bonds. Today, it's 31%. Now, but we know the Spanish government is ultimately the backstop to the banks, so they are already in trouble, and their bonds are trading poorly. So in a way, the banks have now taken on more, weak debt or challenged debt by buying more of their own government bonds. And obviously, the way that it works is simply they got the money from the ECB. The ECB takes government bonds as collateral, so the Spanish banks can buy, Spanish government bonds, bring them to the ECB and borrow against these holdings. But the Spanish bank take the ultimate risk, of these issues. So this is a process of what we see where markets are completely distorted because of the way that central banks operate, that the regulators operate, that legislators operate. And I think we will see more of this. I do think at some stage we will see capital controls, because I think certain jurisdictions will not like to see that capital is leaving so their banking system or their financial system. Already, some jurisdictions, some countries that are in better shape are openly thinking about closing their borders to capital because they are the source of capital. They see capital flight from abroad into their countries. I mean, Uruguay in Latin America, or Switzerland, obviously, in Europe. So we will see all these, the state will play an ever larger role into these financial markets. And I would even argue that, the system we have right now cannot even be called capitalism anymore, because for capitalism you need functioning capital markets, and we don't have functioning capital markets. The central bank today takes it upon itself to, fix the price of treasury bonds, of government bonds, fix the yield curve. Now in the United States, they're openly targeting mortgage spreads, so risk premiums on other assets. This has nothing to do anymore with the market economy. This is entirely more and more, a managed economy. So this is one aspect. It's nationalization of money and credit, and we're already seeing it. I think this will get worse. Another part of it is what I call the debt monetization, and we've seen that as well. This is quantitative easing or open market transactions by the ECB now, where the central bank is not only the lender of last resort, but the buyer of last resort for any kind of unwanted assets that the state does not want to see decline in price. So the central bank, the printing press, becomes the ultimate backstop to the system. So we're already seeing those two. I think, again, they will get worse. Now, I think the end game that I fear most is obviously inflationary meltdown. And this sort of because most paper money systems have ended because at some stage the public loses confidence in the system and they pull their own money out. Money becomes a hot potato. You would take your money out of the bank, or you spend your paper money, or buy something else, buy something maybe of real value or something to protect yourself. This is not the case right now. I think most people still have some sort of confidence in the system. But if this were ever to change, obviously this is sort of the key point. This is the key risk point, to the system. Does it have to end in hyperinflation? No, it does not. And I said before, it's like, the other outcome or the other end game for paper money systems has historically been that, that the monetary authorities stop printing money. And they said we go back to some hard money system. We end this money printing. As I said before, Britain did it in 1821, the United States did it in 1879. So there are examples of this happening. So we have two outcomes really. And I think there are two, in my view, there are two possible scenarios. One is at some stage to say, this has gone too far. We printed too much money. And it doesn't mean we have to shrink the balance sheet of the Fed or the Bank of England again. If you just stop printing money and just make it clear to the banks and the financial system that this is it. The money that's in the system should do for the next 50 years. So this is it. This is it. I think this in itself would probably cause liquidation because parts of the financial system are only, some assets are only trading where they are, and some financial firms probably can only operate because they constantly get additional drug infusions of money to keep them going. So I think even that would probably lead to liquidation of imbalances. But that's inevitable at some stage anyway. At some stage there has to be that cleansing of the imbalances and dislocations. So either this comes sooner because voluntarily we say, okay, we stop printing money and we go back to a hard money system. I know right now in the United States there are discussions of having another sound money commission. Romney and Ryan said that should they win the presidency, or should Romney win the presidency, he could see himself set up this sound money committee that looks at other ways of arranging money. Obviously there was Ron Paul, the Republican candidate, who even wanted to abolish the Fed, something I'm very sympathetic to. That could work and that would work, but these are all ideas to go back to a hard money system. Personally, I think it's very unlikely that through the political process we go back to such a system for the simple reason that everybody fears the consequences of turning off the monetary tap. The system is addicted to cheap money now, like some people are to crack cocaine. You just can't, if you just turn it off, the withdrawal symptoms will be huge. And this is what everybody fears. And this is why I think the other outcome of the system is we keep printing money, but then we have to see more QE, and it will get ever, they have to do ever more of this. This will not be and naturally by itself. They will have to do more and more, but then at some stage, I think people will lose confidence in the system. There could be various triggers. It could be concern about solvency and people sell government bonds. It could be concern about inflation. If inflation stays high, but all interest rates, real interest rates are practically negative along the government bond curve, if people ditch bonds because they are concerned about inflation, whatever the trigger could be, and I don't know what it will be and when it will be, but if such a trigger hits, I think you could see a mighty liquidation setting in financial markets. Now at that stage, the central banks would have to buy even more assets because they cannot allow the system, they cannot allow higher interest rates because they would pull the rug from under an over-levered financial system. So my key criticism with the current policy of quantitative easing and more quantitative easing in all these countries is not that this will immediately lead to higher inflation. It will probably not, because the transmission mechanisms are blocked, the normal transmission mechanism of injecting money into the system. But it makes an ever larger part of the financial infrastructure dependent on easy money and low interest rates. You keep all these distortions and imbalances, these over-levered balance sheets, you keep that all in place. And importantly now, increasingly, because nobody really wants to borrow anymore, the only borrower left is the state. So what we do with this policy, and this is already happening in the US, I think it's happening in Britain, we're just feeding the public sector with this. We just allow the state to borrow very, very cheaply. And we see in the United States, the US has for 5 years been running $1 trillion deficits and is accumulating debt faster than at any stage in its history, because that's a borrow of last resort. So the central bank has become the lender of last resort. The private sector has already OD'd on cheap credit, but the public sector takes it up, runs huge deficits, accumulates more debt, so we see a growth in public debt. This has to end, obviously at some stage. But again, my scenario is I don't think this is determined. I don't think there's still choices for us to make, and there are choices for policymakers. So I'm not saying this scenario, that scenario definitely has to happen. But whatever it is, I think the end game will be painful, because I think the better option would be to voluntarily go back to former hard money, to stop printing money, allow some liquidation in the market to occur because it's needed. I fear that the political will to do this is just not there, and because nobody wants to take the near-term pain, and so we're just kicking the can down the road.